We won't last another 45 minutes. The chilling words echoed through the night as U.S. Navy SEALs faced death in utter despair. No rescue helicopters, no way out, only darkness and the deafening roar of enemy gunfire. Inside the cramped bunker, a woman clutched her Barrett .50 tightly, her heart torn apart. Obey orders and watch her comrades die, or break them and take the risk alone. Tonight, her silence would become the gunfire of salvation. And from a name once drenched in mockery, she would carve out a legend. In San Diego, right next to the sun-soaked beach, stood a training base that young recruits half-jokingly called the Bone Grinder. It wasn't because the place lacked discipline, but because anyone who stepped through its gates would be pushed until there was nothing left but raw bone and will. Among hundreds of tall, broad-shouldered recruits carrying the aura of American warriors on their backs, there was one smaller figure, easy to overlook in the ranks. That was Lance Corporal and Sniper Elena Vasquez, 29 years old. Her name sat in the military records with a cold, clinical note, not suitable for frontline duty. A neat little period at the end of a sentence, as if her career existed only on paper. But outside those files, Elena still walked across the training ground every morning, uniform pressed, boots striking the dry concrete floor with a hollow, cutting echo. Vasquez was far from weak. In truth, she carried a resilience that many of her male peers envied. But in the military, where bicep size and pull-up counts often seemed to matter more than the sharpness of an eye, her small frame became a punchline. They branded her with a nickname, Phantom Ghost, the shadow who always followed, never leading. Some said it sounded cool, like a Hollywood action flick. But inside the base, it was just another reminder, you don't belong here. Tactical drills were where arrogance showed its sharpest teeth. In a room plastered with maps of Nevada, young officers debated choke points, attack routes, and fields of fire. Elena, as always, sat quietly taking notes, studying the terrain. She spotted a northern ridge, steep and difficult, but from there an observation post could command a full view of the valley. A tactical advantage no one else seemed to see. When she voiced the suggestion, the room froze for a few seconds. Then the laughter erupted dry, explosive like firecrackers going off. Climb up there? Vasquez, you think you're Spider-Man? You haven't even passed your standard test and now you want to put an outpost on a suicide cliff? The mocking smiles spread quickly, the derision cutting through the room. Elena didn't react. She simply folded the map, lips pressed tight. Not because she accepted their judgment, but because she knew that in the military, words carried no weight. Recognition came only through actions the world could not deny. But for the past 8 months, her actions had been reduced to a single word: excluded. During live fire practice, she lingered over her scope adjustments longer than anyone else, so long that a few teammates joked, "Vasquez, are you aiming at Saturn? The target's right in front of you." The laughter rose, harsh and grating, echoing in her ears long after it stopped. Yet Elena stayed patient. She knew what they called obsession, what they mocked as slowness, was the only way she could turn herself into a true weapon. No one understood. And, of course, no one cared. There were even moments of absurd humor, like the time she carried a Barrett nearly twice her body size onto the range. A rookie nearly fell off his chair watching her lift a rifle weighing more than 30 pounds. "That thing's so big, you could use it to prop up a window," he quipped. Elena just shrugged, set the weapon down, and calmly loaded the magazine. Moments later, her round punched dead center through target number 10, cleaner than the shots of the men who had just laughed. Instead of acknowledging it, they smirked and said, "Lucky shot." The truth was, Elena lived in a monotonous loop: propose and be dismissed, train and be ridiculed, prove and be denied. Others had their comrades. She had only her own shadow stretching long across the training ground as night fell. In those lonely moments, she often remembered her grandfather's words, "You don't need many shots, but the ones you take must change everything." That line, like a thin but unbreakable thread, kept her tethered to the path she had chosen. But how could a phantom ghost, an invisible shadow, ever convince an entire military that she was worthy of the front line? That question hung suspended, not only in Elena's mind, but in the hearts of those listening to her story. Because one day, it would be that very silence, that very shadow, that would force the world to listen. Colorado Springs, a name forever tied to the majestic Rockies, where cold winds swept down from snow-capped peaks and turned every road into a test of endurance for those who lived there. Elena Vasquez grew up in that landscape, not with a carefree childhood, but in a constant lesson of survival. Her father died young, leaving a void no one could ever fill. The one who guarded her childhood was her grandfather, a former hunter who had lived through enough winters to know that patience and precision often mattered more than brute strength. In his eyes, Elena was never fragile. He placed an old hunting rifle in her hands, heavy and far longer than her small arms could easily manage. On winter mornings when frost still blanketed the grass, he led her up the mountains, teaching her how to remain utterly still within nature, to feel the direction of the wind against her skin, and to distinguish the rustle of deer from the unnatural stirrings of a predator. He often told her, "You don't need many shots in life, only the ones that matter." That sentence became her compass, a living memory Elena carried throughout her military journey. While other children in Colorado Springs played baseball or went to Friday night football games, Elena was lying belly down on frozen ground, her eyes fixed through a scope, waiting an hour just to release a single round. If there was any humor in it, it came in the moments her grandfather teased, "You don't have to hold your breath until your face turns alien green, just enough so your hands don't shake." And little Elena, not even 10 years old then, would burst out laughing so hard the startled birds flew from the trees. The memories ran so deep that years later, lying on the cold concrete of the San Diego base, she could still close her eyes and imagine she was back in the Rockies. The whistling wind through the mountain passes became the drone of industrial fans, the scent of damp grass replaced by steel and oil, but her focus remained unbroken. She breathed slowly, evenly, learning how to fuse her body with the rifle. While her teammates laughed in the mess hall, sharing stories of girlfriends or grumbling about officers, Elena chose silence. Every night, she transformed her weaknesses, her small frame, her limited strength into her singular strength, precision. No one noticed her. No one cared how many hours she stayed behind when others had gone to bed. To them, she was just a shadow, the phantom ghost. Yet in the dark, every breath, every adjustment of her scope, every test shot accumulated into something no jeer could ever strip away, resolve. Some nights, she tested herself by placing a soda can on a wall and firing just at the cap, proving she could control the fraction of a second it took to squeeze the trigger. Once, when the can exploded and sprayed her face with sticky liquid, she laughed to herself, "At least I get free soda." It was the kind of private humor only those patient enough to train in darkness could ever understand. And then, when Nevada turned into a death trap, when 24 SEALs were surrounded in a frozen valley, it was those memories from the Rockies that kept Elena from staying silent. As the radio crackled with the sound of despair, she remembered her grandfather's gaze, aged but filled with faith. And she knew that if there was ever a moment to turn countless lonely nights into true meaning, this was it. To her teammates, she had always been just the lurking ghost. But in Elena's heart, she knew she was never invisible. She carried the words spoken long ago, "Your shot can change everything." And as the world around her collapsed, she was ready to prove her grandfather had been right all along. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. Inside the concrete bunker, its walls scarred with burn marks, The air was thick with gunpowder and dust. The ceiling shuddered with every barrage exploding outside. Each blast struck like a hammer against the chest, making every soldier crouched on the floor feel as though their hearts were about to rupture. The radio screeched with grim reports pounding like nails into a coffin. Alpha has been locked down. Bravo is about to fall. No air support. You are on your own until sunrise. The bunker sank into a terrifying silence. Every gaze turned toward the shadows, where all understood that rescue could only come in 8 hours. 8 hours while their ammunition could barely hold for a few desperate minutes. One soldier lifted his head, his voice rasping from the depths. "This is it. We're already ghosts." The words fell like a death sentence, heavier than the gunfire outside. Some bit their lips until blood welled, others dropped their faces into their hands, fingers trembling as they searched for the last bullets left in their pouches. No one dared say it aloud, but everyone knew this might be the last night of their lives. Elena sat in a corner, her Barrett stretched across her lap, cold as a shackle of steel. According to orders, she was only to maintain radio contact report, remain silent, and die alongside her comrades. But within her, the threads of restraint were stretched so tight they were about to snap. A vision of her grandfather appeared, his silver hair, his steady voice. "When everyone says it's over, that's when your shot matters most." That sentence roared in her head, drowning out even the machine gun fire outside. Elena knew the choice laid bare before her. Stay put, become the useless ghost they had always called her, or defy orders. Climb the northern ridge, the very position she once proposed in the tactical room, and seize one final chance. Her heart pounded violently, not from the fear of dying, but from the terror of helplessness. The thought of sitting still, watching each comrade fall one by one without lifting a hand was, to her, more brutal than death itself. For a fleeting moment, Elena almost laughed to herself. How ironic. They mocked me for 8 months, and now it's that same stubbornness that might save them. No one saw the faint smile on her lips, but it was enough to keep her calm in the middle of chaos. Outside, the enemy tightened the noose. RPGs screeched through the air, concrete crumbled into shards. She heard the shout of Martinez, the SEAL commander, his voice breaking through the noise. "Command, this is Viper 7. Ammunition nearly depleted. Immediate extraction requested." Then came the flat, lifeless reply through static. "No helicopters. Weather conditions do not permit. Hold until sunrise." The bunker fell into an even darker gloom. A young soldier slowly pulled a family photo from his chest pocket, staring at it as if to burn it into memory. Another, hands shaking, scribbled a few words on a scrap of paper and tucked it into his helmet, hoping someone, someday, might find it. Elena watched them all, her throat tightening, the weight pressing down like stone. She drew a deep breath, hand resting on the steel body of her rifle, heavy, cold, yet familiar. In her mind, questions collided like fire. If she climbed that ridge, could she reach it before being cut down? If she fired and missed, would it expose her and hasten her comrades' slaughter? And if she succeeded, would anyone even believe this reckless gamble had been worth it? Fear swarmed around her, dragging her heart lower with every thought. Yet above it all, anger blazed like fire, consuming her whole. Anger at the sneers, anger at 8 months erased from every chance, anger at the silence that had cornered her into nothingness. But most of all, fury that if she did nothing, they would all truly become ghosts before dawn. She closed her eyes for a moment. In the darkness, she saw the Rockies again, her grandfather's rough hand on her shoulder, his voice low and steady. "The shot you fire can define your whole life." Her eyelids trembled, then lifted. Her eyes lit with an unyielding resolve. Elena knew the choice was now as clear and sharp as lightning in the night. Elena crawled out of the bunker into the darkness, the freezing air lashing against her face like 1,000 tiny blades. The cold no longer felt like weather, it was an unseen adversary, testing her resolve. She pulled at the straps of her pack, feeling the weight of nearly 40 pounds of gear digging into her shoulders. The Barrett, the magazines, the rangefinder all pressing down on her small frame, stretching muscle to the point of tearing. But she did not stop. Before her loomed the cliff face, rising almost straight into the sky, dusted with a thin veil of snow. Enemy flares slashed across the air like knives, slicing through the night, leaving shadows that flickered and trembled. With every move upward, Elena felt as though she was exposed beneath the invisible gaze of hundreds of rifles. Her hand slipped against the frozen stone, then locked tight into a narrow crevice. Skin split open, blood seeping bright against the stark white of ice. The pain shot through her hand, but she clenched her teeth and told herself, "Pain means I'm still alive." A bitter, twisted sense of humor flashed in her mind, the kind of thought only someone clinging to a cliff under a rain of bullets could possibly laugh at. From the valley below, explosions echoed upward like rolling thunder. RPGs shrieked through the sky. Mortar rounds pounded in relentless rhythm. She could hear it clearly, the cries for help, the shouts tangled with fire and smoke. Her heart tightened, but she refused to look down. At this height, a single glance over her shoulder could pull her entire body off the rock, sending her plunging into the abyss. She kept climbing. Every meter gained wasn't just a test of strength, it was a gamble with her life. Back at the base, they had laughed when she proposed using this northern ridge. "Climb up there and you'll be dead before you can even fire a shot." Now, the very path they had dismissed was the only route left for the SEAL's survival. And she, the forgotten phantom ghost, was the only one who knew how to reach it. The wind howled in bursts, driving stinging flakes of snow against her eyes, blurring her vision. Her breath poured out in thick white clouds, heavy as if they were small storms breaking apart in the air. Her fingers trembled, not only from the cold but from the pull of the rifle dragging down as though trying to haul her into the void. She forced her mind back to the long nights in San Diego, lying on the cold concrete, practicing breath control. Those silent hours had become her weapon now, keeping her heart steady and her lungs calm. A massive boulder blocked her path. Elena pressed her body flat against it, crawling upward like a mountain cat stalking prey. At times she slipped, her boot skidding off a ledge, her heart free-falling out of her chest, but her muscles seized in time, holding her weight, gripping back onto life in a single heartbeat. Once, a pebble broke loose under her hand, tumbling into the darkness below until it vanished. Elena pursed her lips and muttered, "At least it fell faster than I will." A sharp, bitter smile crossed her face, the only humor left in the middle of despair. Time stretched into what felt like centuries. Every meter conquered came with the breath of death at her neck. Yet through it all, her grandfather's voice echoed in her head. "The shot you fire can change everything." That memory carried her forward, turning each heartbeat into a drumbeat urging her higher. Finally, after more than an hour of unbroken climbing, Elena's trembling arms pulled her body over the ridge. She collapsed onto the frozen stone, chest heaving, lungs aflame. The cold seeped into her back, but to her now, it felt more comforting than any mattress at the barracks. She would not allow herself to rest. Every second meant a life. She pulled the Barrett free from her pack, brushed the snow from its barrel, and began to set up her position. Her eyes swept down the valley, the sight unfolding like a painting of fire and ruin. SEALs huddled in the wreckage, enemy fire pouring in, every muzzle flash, a crimson spark puncturing the night. From here she could see at all positions no one on the ground could possibly detect, tactical gaps only revealed from this vantage point. This was why she had suggested it from the very beginning. And now, she was the only one reckless or perhaps resolute enough to stand here. Elena whispered, almost too softly for even herself to hear. Let every step of this climb mean something. Elena lay flat against the rocky slope, her body pressed tight into the freezing granite, as if she had fused herself with the mountain itself. The wind roared around her, yet her breathing remained eerily steady. Through the Barrett's scope, the valley below no longer looked like a hopeless blur of chaos. It became a deadly chessboard. Each flash from an enemy muzzle marked a piece on the board, moving with ruthless precision. And Elena, the one they had once dismissed as the phantom ghost, was now the only player who could read the next move. Her finger brushed the trigger, so lightly it was as though she feared breaking the fragile silence. Then she squeezed. The crack of the shot tore through the air, echoing down the valley. In an instant, the heavy machine gun tearing apart the SEALs' defenses went silent. The sudden halt in gunfire froze both sides alike. For a few heartbeats, the air itself seemed sucked away. Then another shot. A target fell. A third. A fourth, each one a vital piece struck down with chilling precision. In the bunker, Martinez raised his binoculars. His voice broke into a whisper of disbelief. "Who's shooting like that?" No one answered. The only truth was undeniable. An unseen sniper was turning the tide of the entire battle. Elena knew the rule of survival. Never fire twice from the same spot. She crawled across the jagged rocks, shifting constantly, using the mountain's shadows and unforgiving terrain as her shield. From below, she was no longer a soldier. They saw a ghost flitting in and out of the dark. And for the first time, the nickname Phantom Ghost was no insult. It was truth. She pressed the radio, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. "Guardian Overwatch to Viper 7. Move north. I'll cover you." That steadiness stunned the SEALs. In what they believed were their final moments, they heard the voice of an invisible guardian. Martinez faltered, then understood. Someone had done what he himself had dismissed as impossible. High above, Elena continued to paint the battlefield with her bullets. Not a single round was wasted. For 47 taut minutes, only 31 shots left her rifle. But each one, each single round, was life or death. Every squeeze of the trigger silenced a machine gun nest. A commander fell. A volley of RPGs fizzled before they could even fire. The valley, once filled with the screams of assault, now dissolved into another kind of chaos. The enemy glanced at one another with wide, fearful eyes. They had believed in their overwhelming superiority, but piece by piece their board was being dismantled. Confidence crumbled into confusion, confusion into fear. In the bunker, SEALs raised their heads. Where moments before their eyes had been hollow with despair, now sparks of hope broke through. Martinez murmured as though to himself, "She's done it!" Then he shouted the order, "Move north!" As the team split and advanced, Elena shifted her angle with each shot, carving out narrow corridors through the storm of fire. She guided them like a master chess player, driving the enemy back, move by move, across the board. At one fleeting moment, as she slid past a jagged outcrop, a pebble slipped from under her knee, clicking sharply against the rock as it tumbled down. Elena smirked quietly. "Perfect. Let's hope they think it's just a mountain squirrel." That dry, absurd humor kept her human, kept her from becoming a soulless machine. Then the final shot rang out sharp, decisive. Through her scope, she watched the enemy commander crumple, his radio shattering against the stone. It was an invisible signal. The dozens of fighters remaining broke, scattering into the night. Their bravado shattered, leaving only terror of an unseen sniper they could never find. Silence swept across the valley. But this time, it was not the silence of despair. It was the silence of an impossible victory. 24 SEALs, men who had already signed their death warrants in their minds, still lived, and all of it was because of one lone sniper on the mountainside. Elena stayed prone, chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. Cold sweat clung beneath her heavy jacket, her fingers still trembling faintly after the last trigger pull. 31 bullets, no more. And every single one had mattered. In the dark, she closed her eyes, letting the mountain wind lash against her skin. No cheers, no applause. Only the howl of the wind through the granite cliffs, nature itself, the lone witness to the truth. The phantom ghost had saved a SEAL team from annihilation. Dawn spilled across the valley, pale golden light filtering through the jagged mountain ridges, casting its glow on faces worn and weary, streaked with mud and dried blood. The thunder of rescue helicopters rolled overhead, rotor blades whipping the air into violent gusts that sent tattered flags snapping furiously. The remaining SEALs stood huddled together, their armor ripped, their bandages frayed, but every one of them still breathing. It was something none of them dared believe, even as their own eyes bore witness. All heads turned toward the northern ridge, the same place they had mocked just hours before, when a small, unassuming woman had suggested establishing an observation post there. Now that very ridge had become the unseen hand of salvation, and it was the phantom ghost, once a useless shadow who had transformed scorn into living truth. Elena emerged from the rocky ledge, her slight figure outlined against the blazing sky. Across her shoulders the barret hung heavy, glinting steel catching the light. With each step, gravel and dust slipped beneath her boots, tumbling downward, as if the mountain itself whispered of the battle it had just borne witness to. Colonel Donovan stepped out from the circle of soldiers, his stern face betraying a flicker of unease. He had been the one to dismiss Elena in the tactical room, the one who had said bluntly, "Climb up there and you'll be dead before you can even fire." And yet here he stood now, in the gaze of dozens of men, confronted with the truth of his mistake. No long speeches, no hurried handshake. He simply raised his hand in the most formal salute, the military reserved for acts of courage beyond the standard of duty. In that moment the entire valley fell silent, as if even the mountain winds had paused to make room for reverence. Elena returned the salute, her spine straight, her eyes holding neither arrogance nor avoidance, only calm, the calm of one who had just proven what no one else believed possible. That salute was not just recognition. It was a silent apology for months of scorn. The silence stretched on. Then, from the ranks behind, a young SEAL took one tentative step forward and lifted his hand in salute. A single gesture, yet it fell like a stone into still water. Immediately another followed, then another, until the entire unit rose in unison. Dozens of arms raised, firm and reverent. The sound of fabric snapping against the wind became a wordless hymn. That was the transformation. 8 months of ridicule, 8 months of being called the useless ghost, all dissolved in that single collective salute. They no longer saw a small woman, but a warrior who had rewritten the rules of battle. Martinez stood toward the back, his eyes a mix of pride and quiet shame. He had been the one to dismiss her ideas most often. Now, he looked at her directly, his head dipping in a subtle nod, a wordless admission of fault and respect. Elena bowed her head slightly, accepting the acknowledgement without needing to bask in it. In the military, pride often came not from words, but from silence. Yet deep inside, a corner of her heart allowed itself a quiet smile. If anyone had asked how she felt, Elena might have answered simply, "Worth every one of those 8 silent months." The helicopter dropped lower, its downdraft kicking up swirls of dust that blurred the scene into a haze. The SEALs staggered toward it, bodies broken but steps suddenly lighter. They knew the only reason they could board that bird alive was because of the woman still standing there, barret slung across her back, quiet as if nothing had happened. A grizzled SEAL, his beard silvered with age, muttered half in jest, half in truth, "If that's a ghost, then I hope this one haunts me forever." Soft laughter rippled through the group, the kind of fragile humor only those who had stared death in the face could share. As they climbed aboard, their eyes remained fixed on the northern ridge, where Elena stood small yet burning bright in the morning Sunday. No one spoke further. There was no need. The name Phantom Ghost was no longer a slur. It was a symbol. San Diego welcomed them back with its usual flood of golden sunlight. But for Elena, the base had never looked so different. The same weathered concrete walls, the dusty training yards, the rows of wooden benches where she had once sat quietly cleaning her rifle, all of it suddenly felt unfamiliar, as if she had stepped into another world, even though nothing had changed except herself. The heavy barrette still weighed on her shoulder, the cuts on her hands still unhealed, mountain dust still clinging to the cuffs of her pants, but her steps no longer faltered. On the training field, where 8 months ago mocking laughter had filled the air, there now echoed a strange silence. People looked at her not with scorn, not with sneers, but with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. A young recruit, face still boyish, hesitantly approached. His voice was soft, but in the stillness it carried clearly. "Are you really the phantom ghost?" Elena paused, her eyes flickering with surprise. Then the corners of her lips curved into a faint smile. The name that had once cut like a wound no longer carried humiliation, but instead had become a symbol. Phantom Ghost, the invisible shadow who had saved an entire SEAL team. Her answer needed no words. The calm in her eyes, the straightness of her stance under the San Diego sun was the clearest confirmation. In that moment, the nickname that had been her chain became her crown. News of the operation spread faster than the ocean breeze. In the officer's briefing room, Elena Vasquez's name appeared in reports no longer stamped with the phrase "unfit for the front line," but instead with a stark statistic: 31 confirmed kills in 47 minutes. 0 friendly casualties. Cold numbers, yet behind them burned a story so extraordinary that everyone wanted to hear it. The men who had once laughed when she suggested the northern ridge now fell silent whenever they passed her. Some were brave enough to nod. Others lowered their eyes. Elena neither resented nor demanded anything. She understood that true recognition rarely came from apologies, but from the quiet shift in the way people looked at you. In the nights that followed, the base was still alive with laughter and chatter. But this time, when Elena sat in the corner cleaning her rifle, no one dared throw jibes. Some came closer, curious, asking how she calibrated her scope. One recruit even joked clumsily, "Can you teach me how to vanish like a ghost?" Elena let out a rare, genuine laugh and answered, "Start by lying still for 8 hours in the cold wind." The group burst into laughter, not mocking, but the laughter of men eager to learn. Yet for Elena, the most precious change was not newfound respect from her comrades. It was freedom from her own self-doubt. 8 months of silence. 8 months under the weight of disdain. All of it had led to the moment she looked through her scope and shifted the fate of a battle. It was those painful months that gave weight to the recognition she now received. Her story quickly escaped the walls of the base. In classified reports, over officers' dinners, even in coffee shops near the beach, people began to recount the tale of a female soldier who had climbed an impossible ridge and dropped 31 targets. No one knew the exact details, each retelling gained or lost pieces, but the name Phantom Ghost steadily grew into legend. Elena kept her old habit, each night returning to the empty training yard, lying flat on the cold concrete, practicing her breath. But now, no one looked at her as strange. Instead, a few young recruits spread mats beside her, trying to mimic each inhale and exhale. Elena smiled, remembering her grandfather's words, "You don't need many shots, only the ones that matter." Perhaps what he never said aloud was that each of those shots could inspire an entire generation. And so, as the San Diego sea breeze carried its sharp scent of salt, Elena rose, barrette slung over her shoulder. On that training ground, she was no longer a shadow. She was a figure others measured themselves against, living proof that true courage is never loud, never needing spotlights. It lies in silence, in patience, and in the moment you choose to rise when the rest of the world has already given up. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.